Fallout might be one of my favorite franchises of all time. I grew up with it. Fallout 3 and New Vegas were some of the first video games I ever played. I have distinctive memories of playing Fallout 3 for the first time, stepping out of the vault, hitting a wild dog with a police baton, watching its head fall off, and then running into the living room and crying because I was 7. But, like many Fallout fans, I have some disagreements with its more recent installments, namely Fallout 4. And I think the best way to talk about these problems would be to simply talk you through a playthrough of the game and discuss them as they come up. So, the game begins, eventually. First you say hi to your wife, then you build a character, then you say hi to your baby Sean, and oh boy, an inciting incident. Then you run to the vault.
Oh my god!
That's gonna affect the economy. Get frozen, say goodbye to your wife, do a tutorial dungeon, and finally, the game proper begins. This intro has a few problems. First among them is my wife, because I just met her. All I know about her is that she had sex once, likes Sean, and dislikes being shot to death. So when that happens, I don't care because I never had any time to actually get to know her, get attached to her. And don't get me started on Sean. He's a baby. He's not great for conversation. But fixing this would have exacerbated the other issue this intro has, which is that it's just really long. Now, this might not seem like the biggest issue, but in a game, and indeed a genre that insists that you play it again, and again, and again, and again, this intro gets old fast. But hey, the best thing about long intros like this is eventually they end, and this one does too. So, one of the first things we do is go to the local town of Concord, meet the neighbors, and after a mild disagreement, we meet the game's first faction, the Minutemen, and their leader, Preston Garvey. Now, I have some problems with the Minutemen, and they're probably not the criticisms you're used to hearing.
I've had word from a settlement asking for help.
It's that the Minutemen have absolutely no staying power. Like, they plan on setting up a constitutional government in the Wasteland, but I'm just not sure how they're going to do that, because all Preston and his band of merry men are equipped to do is shoot problems with a gun. Even if they succeed, Preston's just not a leader. He can barely keep his group of half-starved refugees together. And the protagonist, due to the nature of how the game works, kind of has to exist in a quantum superstate of all personalities at once, so I kind of don't want them in charge of the Minutemen either. I genuinely don't think Preston has a plan for what he's going to do after the Minutemen are back at full strength. Like, if the problem can't be solved with a gun, he just can't solve it. Like, what if a plant disease starts infecting and killing crops? What if one settlement's crops attract insects that eat another settlement's crops? What is Preston's tax plan? How does he plan on tackling the housing crisis? How will the rise of the Minutemen affect the Mirelurk population? Those things are an endangered species, you know, in the sense that they keep endangering me. But whatever, we help the Minutemen and we're informed that our best shot at locating Sean is in Diamond City, the largest settlement in the region, so we make our way there. We approach Diamond City, and we're introduced to... would you excuse me for one moment? Ahem. This is why Piper's the worst human being I have ever had the displeasure of being introduced to. Number one, because she is the worst journalist. Have you ever actually bothered to read the paper that Piper prints? Because all it is a long-winded story about a synth, an android that can potentially replace a person, shooting a bunch of people dead at one point, and at the end it goes, well, the mayor sat in the same spot as that synth. Coincidence? I think not. And, as a reminder, this paper gets a man killed. The fact she turns out to be right about the mayor doesn't matter because she has no reason to believe it. And when you get interviewed by Piper, she immediately asks you if you think the Institute, the group responsible for making sense, is involved with kidnapping your son.
Do you suspect the Institute's involved?
This is a grieving, recently single father, and she's asking him to throw out random accusations towards groups he doesn't even know about his kidnapped son. And if you say you don't suspect the Institute, she insists that they must be involved.
A man took Sean, not some shadowy group.
I hope that's true. Because if they are involved, everything gets worse.
Presumably because the headline, Institute Kidnaps Baby, would sell more papers. This is some of the least ethical journalism I have ever seen. I wouldn't mind, but Piper doesn't actually do anything. These are the only 2 papers she has ever written. You can go into her house, and there is this weird Q&A thing in there, but that's it. No other interviews, no other papers. Piper wrote 2 newspapers and just decided she's the last bastion of free speech in the wasteland. There's a bit later on in the main plot when you find out the Institute actually is responsible, and Piper says this.
Well, you 2 are out. I'm gonna do some more research. I'll be at the public if you need me.
And at that moment, I threw up my hands and yelled, "Research with what, Piper? A bucket?" What is she actually planning on doing? Asking random people what their opinion is on what is basically the Illuminati? It might seem like I'm being overly cruel towards Piper, and I am, but it's a reflection of a wider problem that's throughout Fallout 4, which is that none of the characters ever do anything. And what I mean by that is when a character in this game has a problem, they don't have a plan in place to try and fix it, they're not doing anything to try and alleviate the problem, they wait for someone vaguely protagonist-looking to show up and then ask them to do it for them. It all comes together to make this world feel so static and lifeless, like these characters exist only to give you quests and experience. But with all this talk of what a bad character looks like, I think it's important to talk about a good one, and isn't it just convenient that our next quest sends us to go find one? You see, when you arrive in Diamond City, the local detective, Nick Valentine, is missing, so it falls to us to find him. We track him down to a nearby subway station, which is being controlled by, the Mafia. We free him from his captors and get him back to Diamond City so he can help us find Sean. Now, I'll admit, Nick on paper doesn't seem all that different from, say, Preston Garvey. He's been pinned down by raiders with no hope of escape and needs to wait for us, the protagonist, to show up to save him. But, crucially, Nick has boatloads of extra context that make it just that much better. He's here not because he's just been captured by raiders who just love to kidnap and murder people. He's here because a previous case he was working on led him here.
The runaway daughter I came here to find wasn't kidnapped. She's Skinny Malone's new flame.
And the only reason he's not dead is because he has history with the guy who captured him.
I told you we should have just killed him! But then you had to get all sentimental. All that stupid crap about the old times.
Darla, I'm handling this!
When you get back to Diamond City, Nick's got files and notes on cases he's working on and you can follow up on them. It all adds to the feeling that Nick is a human being who exists in this world. So anyway, when we get back, we get interviewed by Nick and we find out that Sean was most likely taken by a mercenary named Kellogg, who conveniently was living in Diamond City for a little bit. So we track him down with the help of everyone's favorite, dog meat. I'd like to take this moment to appreciate that the main plot literally could not happen without the help of dog meat. If anything were to ever happen to this dog, the main plot becomes impossible. He really is the best boy. But I digress. We follow Dogmeat and he eventually leads us to Fort Hagen, where Kellogg is located. We get shot by some turrets because screw you and the melee build you rode in on, I guess. We fight our way through Kellogg's army of synths, but eventually the synths thin out, and things get a bit quiet. This is it. The man who shot your wife and kidnapped your son. Now, it's time to get some answers. Oh, he's dead. Yeah, the confrontation with Kellogg doesn't actually go anywhere. All you learn is that the Institute's involved and what color the inside of his skull is. And it's a shame because we find out later that Kellogg's actually a really interesting character, which kind of reveals the biggest criticism I have of Fallout 4, which is that it's just so full of ideas and characters and things and places and interesting concepts that just don't go anywhere. Like a grizzled post-apocalyptic mercenary who raises a child in order to redeem himself for past actions he feels genuine guilt over is an interesting story. A robot detective who struggles with his own identity because his personality is a copy of someone else's is an interesting story. A naive man who tries desperately to hold on to any last sense of innocence and hope in a world that seems to want nothing more than to tear it away from him in the most violent way possible is an interesting story. It's just a shame that none of these stories are in this game. The most meaningful interaction we have with that grizzled mercenary is picking his brains off of my baseball bat. Nick solves his identity crisis by shooting a guy to death and deciding he feels better now. And Preston Garvey is Preston Garvey. And all of this just makes Fallout 4 that much worse because you can see how much better it could have been. Back in the main plot, Nick recommends taking Kellogg's brain to someone named Dr. Amari in a place called the Memory Den. And I really like the Memory Den. It's a cool concept, and I especially like Dr. Amari. I like how she knows people and, feels like a character who actually exists in this world. And I love how she has absolutely no sense of humor.
Oh, I'm going in naked. Fingers crossed I get superpowers.
I know you're joking, but as a doctor, I feel obligated to remind you that unprotected radioactive exposure will only kill you.
We plug Kellogg's brain, which we've been carrying around in our pocket this whole time, into the machine and get taken through what is essentially a cutscene where we find out there's an Institute scientist hiding in a place called the Glowing Sea, an area of extremely high radiation and dangerous wildlife. So we set off to find him, but before we can leave, Nick starts talking to us in Kellogg's voice, implying that Kellogg's consciousness has somehow gotten downloaded into Nick's brain.
Hope you got what you were looking for inside my head. I was right. I should have killed you when you were on ice.
This fact is not important and will never be brought up again. Anyway, we approach the Glowing Sea, the burnt trees providing a physical border between us and what is the most dangerous area in the entire wasteland. The air around us visibly changing to a shade of bright green to illustrate that this place is deadly, hostile, and an excellent opportunity to discuss some of my complaints with the core game design of Fallout 4. My first complaint requires a bit of a history lesson. You see, in Fallout 1, 2, and New Vegas, enemies are leveled to the map. Whenever you go to an area, the enemies there will always be about the same difficulty regardless of your level, and this system works really well for what these games are trying to do, which is tell a story and build a world. Because it allows the developers to keep a firm grip on the pacing while still allowing a player to go anywhere in the world, provided they have the skills necessary to brave the more dangerous areas. Most Bethesda games, like Fallout 3 and Skyrim on the other hand, level their enemies to the player. This system works really well for what these games are trying to do, which is to create a game where a player can go theoretically anywhere in the world without running into difficult roadblocks that would prevent that. Fallout 4, however, tries to do both. Its enemies are leveled mostly to the map with a little bit of variation based on the player, but the items and equipment you'll be finding are going to be leveled to you. This, as it turns out, is not great, because it means there's virtually no reward to braving the more dangerous areas. You'll be taking on tougher threats, but receiving the same rewards you'd get anywhere else. Like, you'll travel to the farthest reaches of the land, battle with monsters twice your size, only to find that they were guarding some 38 bullets and a bit of rat-away. Oh joy. But my biggest problem with the Glowing Sea specifically is that, well, it has a nice atmosphere, sure, but there's just nothing here. Like, oh joy, I found cave, have I? I wonder what adventure waits me and oh, it's over. But you may have noticed that this cave leads directly to a half-buried truck stop. I wonder what might be it's empty. But look, there's a factory over there. Surely there must be something within there. And yes, there is! Some rat-away. Yippee! And this is very similar to a problem that exists throughout Fallout 4, which is that it has so many locations that just feel so empty. Like, they have loot to find, and that loot is genuinely useful, it's just hard to appreciate its usefulness on the ground level. Case in point, one of the best rewards this game has for exploration is magazines and bobbleheads. These magazines and bobbleheads provide bonuses like plus 5% to critical melee damage. And by the end of the game, I was genuinely feeling those bonuses, but it's just so difficult to appreciate a 5% bonus on a moment-to-moment basis. But we eventually make our way through the Glowing Sea and track down the scientist, and he informs us that the only way to infiltrate the Institute is to kill a Courser, essentially a Terminator, and steal his delicious brain chips. Wow, what a coincidence, I happen to have practice in this field. So we set out to find our Metal Man and find him holed out in a high-rise building under assault by the Gunners, a well-equipped mercenary group that, as far as gameplay is concerned, are just raiders with better hygiene. We get inside and we find that the Gunners are after the same man we are, and the game goes out of its way to illustrate that this entire group of trained mercenaries can't take down a single Courser, in order to show that we're going to be going up against a literal killing machine, and that the fight will be brutal. Yeah, you saw that coming. So we remove the Courser's brain chip and take the second desiccated brain this week back to Dr. Amari, where she informs us that in order to get it decoded, we need to take it to a group called the Railroad, a literally underground organization that helps synths escape from the Institute and find a new life. And the Railroad is, well, it's 7 guys in a shed. They have a similar problem to what the Minutemen had in that I don't know what they plan on doing after the Institute is destroyed, but since it's a counter-organization, I'm willing to let that slide. But other than that, I really just don't have a lot to say about them. But after a hot take from our protagonist, we hand over the chip, and while they're decoding it, we get sent on a quest to benefit the Railroad, where we're given a classic illusion of choice.
I say we go through the front door. Minefield or not.
What?
Institute bastards powered off the elevator. We kill all of them, and we still gotta go in the back way.
We fight our way through some synths, but not the kind of synths that the Railroad wants to save, don't worry. Deacon somehow managed to hand me a gun through 3 separate walls, and we return back to the Railroad where the chip has been decoded. And from this chip, we find out how to infiltrate the Institute, and also that it pairs well with French onion dip. We return to base, build a machine that will allow us to infiltrate the Institute, and finally, we arrive. And the Institute. Where to even begin with the Institute? How about the fact that they're just so dumb? Like, the reason they took Sean is because they needed a person unexposed to radiation to model their synths after, which might sound contrived, but this is Fallout, it happens every other week. But they left you alive as a backup in case something went wrong with Sean. First off, I want to know how that conversation was going to go. Like, yeah, we're the group that shot your wife and kidnapped your son, and your son did die while we were experimenting on him, but, good news, now you get to come to the Institute with us, champagne all round. And they leave you alive as a backup, but they actively kill all these other people. Does the Institute not plan on if they fail twice? I guess not.
Have we got a plan B?
Seriously? No, this is it.
And this one's more of a nitpick, but if I were going to send someone to retrieve the person who might be the most important asset to my organization ever, I wouldn't send the known murderer. Like, the game hypes up Kellogg as the only one who could have possibly done a job like this, but all he really did was say one line and shoot an unarmed woman. And the problems don't stop there. There's a quest you can do where you help them test some experimental seeds they've been working on, and the way they've decided to test them is they've replaced an existing farmer in the wasteland with a synth. And when you first get to the Institute, they're all like, oh, you've probably heard so many things about us, but we're here to prove to you that you've got it all wrong.
I can only imagine what you've heard, what you think of us. I'd like to show you that you may have the wrong impression.
And this guy openly admits they kidnapped and murdered a husband and father just to test some fancy seeds. And that fact is never brought up again, by the way. What makes it worse is that when you get to the farm they're testing the seeds at, there's a guy who's figured out that the farmer's a synth, and you end up gaslighting him into thinking he's crazy. Yeah, I really get the sense that the Institute's just misunderstood. And it's a real shame, because I took a little bit of extra time to actually get to know the Institute, and I ended up kind of liking them as a faction, and it's mostly because they actually react to you suddenly being put in charge of everything.
I am naming my father as my successor.
Oh, boy. You can't be serious!
Really?
How can you possibly justify this? He isn't one of us. He isn't even a scientist.
And it makes a lot of sense for them to act like that. The only reason you're being put in charge is through reverse nepotism. Oh, yeah, Sean's the leader of the Institute now. I don't think I mentioned that. He's an old man. It's not important. You got refrozen at the beginning of the game. That Sean's a robot. Don't worry about it. And maybe it's all intentional. Maybe they're supposed to come across as reckless idiots with no grasp of the consequences of their actions. But that just means that they're horrible people and terrible scientists, as opposed to poorly written horrible people and terrible scientists. If we want to continue down the main plot, it's at this point when we need to start taking sides in regards to the 4 major factions, and in order to do that properly, we begrudgingly need to talk about Fallout 4's main theme. You see, Fallout 4 is chiefly about synths, and it's the same plot that always gets brought up in sci-fi when sentient machines are involved. If I stuck a refrigerator magnet to a synth skull, would it drop dead? And also, can they truly have free will and boring stuff like that? And Fallout 4 is uniquely bad at asking this question. Because, you see, Fallout 4 is full of actual literal robots that constantly display human emotion and signs of self-awareness. Like, Codsworth here has a mental breakdown the first time you meet him, because you abandoned him. Curie wants to be human. Cleo has a gender identity.
What are you?
I'm a woman, baby.
And all of this just raises the question, if the murder bot with tits is allowed to be a part of polite society, why is my man Z114 being excluded? Oh, because he's a body snatcher. Well, not all of us can be titty murder bots, can we? There is, in all of this, one saving grace, and that is the aforementioned Curie. And that's because Curie's quest is actually really good. It has a lot of strong characters, does great world building, and importantly, instead of focusing on the question of whether or not a robot can ever truly have free will, it focuses on the much more interesting topic of the difficulties a robot would have acclimatizing to being human.
Remember, to breathe. I keep thinking if I forget to do this, no more Curie.
And in this quest, we find out that the way robots think is fundamentally different than the way synths think.
Becoming a synth is just so overwhelming. At first it was a struggle just to master basic functioning. How to brush the teeth, how to operate with only 2 hands, etc. But now I am full of inconsequential thoughts, feelings. How do you do everything with this whirlwind in the head?
And this doesn't quite fix Fallout 4's sentient robot problem, but it does alleviate it somewhat. But with all the major factions finally introduced to us, it's time we begin working on the final missions of the game. If we side with the Railroad, we assault the Institute and blow it up with a nuclear device they just sort of made, casually, and after that we sneak into the base of that other faction I've been avoiding talking about and blow it up. If we side with the Minutemen, we assault the Institute and blow them up with the same nuclear device that I guess they, found in between the couch cushions somewhere, and then we blow up the, But if we side with the Institute, we're tasked with killing all of the members of the Railroad, and then there's no putting it off any longer. The final faction that I've been hiding from you is the Brotherhood of Steel, a classic Fallout faction that has tasked themselves with the collection and preservation of old technology. And I think I hate them in this game. And the reason I hate them so much is kind of interesting. You see, the reason the Brotherhood is here is because they just hate synths and ghouls and super mutants, and they want them all gone. And would taking out some of the Commonwealth's biggest threats be worth the lives of those who got caught in the crossfire is an interesting question. It's just not one that Fallout 4 ever asks. And it's especially odd because you are required by the main game to know at least one synth, and that synth is required to have helped you in a place where no one else could have. And you can meet super mutants and ghouls throughout the game who are very good people, and you can never bring this up to the Brotherhood. You can never, even for a moment, imply that you disagree with the Brotherhood's rhetoric. You either completely agree with all of their ideas without compromise, or you blow them up. And it's not just you who can't bring this up, no one in the Brotherhood even so much as suggests that they're not doing the right thing all the time. In fact, they don't suggest they want to do anything like go home or have a conversation or enjoy some nice ice-cold Nuka-Cola or do anything except fight the war, because they just love fighting and shooting things and murder and war. They just love war. And it's just really jarring to go from listening to audio logs about people who consider a war their country is in as this impending doom they have very little power to do anything about, to... And the absolute worst among them is Paladin Danse. God, I hate Paladin Danse. He exemplifies the Brotherhood's worst qualities. He's a guy who loves war so much that I genuinely don't think he has a plan for what he's going to do when the war is over. Paladin Danse believes in the Brotherhood's ideals so much that when it's later revealed that he's a synth and you get sent to kill him, spoiler alert, he accepts his death without question, and you have to convince him to let himself live. And the speech he gives about him considering himself human and worthy to live is a good one, but you want to know what it does? Absolutely nothing. Paladin Danse is the same man after this quest as he was before. He believes in the exact same philosophies and ideals. Nothing has changed. I guess I should applaud Paladin Dance for being willing to literally die for his beliefs, but frankly, I'm just insulted I spent the time convincing him he should live, and it didn't change him a bit. And that moment, right there, when I was writing that line down in the script, is when it hit me. Why I hate every single character and faction in this game. Why they feel so pointless and empty. And it's because none of the factions, and barely any of the characters, ever change or develop by the end of the game. They're never challenged on any of their philosophies, because they barely have philosophies to be challenged on. And the few good ones, the ones that do change and have interesting stories to tell, don't make it better, because they're surrounded on all sides by, well, video game NPCs. Programmed personalities designed to look and act human. All of this, of course, begs the question, why? Why spend all this time ranting and raving about a game that came out back in 2015? Jesus Christ. Well, it's simple. You see, I believe bad art pushes the medium forward in much the same way that good art does, where good art can inspire and encourage and show you what's possible within its respective medium. Bad art is an excellent resource to learn from. It can show you what can go wrong and how to avoid it, and it helps you better appreciate those things when they go well. Look, there's a saying in creative spaces. Art is not defined by who did it first, but by who did it best. That's a quote from Wario, I believe. But I think that whoever did it worst deserves just a little bit of credit too.